Democritus, and really, and Leucippus, or the other way around. I made this up again this time. No? And then the second point that we want to develop is Protagoras. Protagoras, poetic ontology. So I made it up as well. Okay, so first of all, I mean, and then we'll see, because tonight you were saying, Michael, where we, I don't know when we met last time, it was a long time ago, no?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And I was thinking before coming, I was thinking that by now the question of being has been forgotten.
Once again.
So,
No, we did in fact a release in your Burnett moment of that. We talked a little bit about the theoretician of the senses, but Marx is in the 1844 manuscript, and you know we were looking at that. I mean, I thought the high point that you did was this was in February. You know, the long section on Epicurus in Burnett, and then we talked a little bit about Freud and Berthaud, you know, in terms of excess, and the Hegelian moment of the combination and separation that which comes to mind, no such thing as nature.
yes.
So we have these kind of moments.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I would begin tonight, because tonight this is the last, the fourth.
And Chris Miller's not coming?
No, in fact, I hadn't included her in the last email, because she had emailed me to say that she couldn't make it.
Oh, okay.
So
I see. That's
right,
I said
right.
after.
But she said next time she would like to take it from the start or any other thing. That,
Okay, good.
So in any case, I mean, because I was thinking, right, it's the fourth of the second segment, right, what is and what is not, and the
Right.
10th seminar of the whole thing, right, the
Right.
Presocratics and their contemporary relevance. So maybe because of this as well, but it's always good to do so, a general review of the whole question, the whole journey really, the ones, Michael, you use the word I like
Right.
in this respect. And so, I mean, we started with the question of that starts philosophy, right? What is it? The question that then gives rise to the concept of the arche, right? So we saw the Milesian school, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, right? Who again remember that the problem is that the question what is it cannot be answered easily or immediately, and therefore the hypothesis that perhaps there is something behind, that there is something, that there is perhaps an underlying nature, an underlying, you know, precisely this is the arche, the common substance and first principle and so on. And this, each one of them gave different answers. Water for Thales, the apeiron, right, the boundless for Anaximander, and still boundless but determinate this time, not indeterminate, air for Anaximenes. And then we saw briefly Pythagoras and his school, and therefore, with them, the question is still there. What is it? It is numbers. So we spoke actually quite, you know, a lot about that as well. And then we moved into the, perhaps what we can call, I mean, can be called the central moment of Presocratic philosophy with Heraclitus and Parmenides. First of all, Heraclitus, I mean, the important, he was
Scholar,
by,
the obscure scholar.
Yeah. Maybe it's even a scam, but it was start by itself, right?
No.
So, with
Might be Martin Heidegger.
no, if I
Is
start
that right?
with
Calling
this,
itself.
like a
Call of conscience. Okay.
yes. So in any case, Heraclitus, the thing, right? I mean, important in many ways, but certainly in relation to the question of philosophy and ultimately of metaphysics, right? The question of metaphysics and ontology, what is it? The question of the essence, the whatness, and so on. He says, look, I mean, what seems to be a problem, that things change, because that is the problem, right? Things change, how can we say what it is? Maybe, therefore, there is this underlying nature. And Heraclitus says, no, that's actually what it is, right? This process of a change, of a becoming, coming to be, that then maybe metaphorically we can say is also this fire that the cosmos itself is. That's reality. You don't have to look further, beyond, and so on and so forth. A position that, of course, we find again and again in the history of philosophy. I mean, certainly Nietzsche says something. I don't know if we mentioned that, but in that passage from On the Genealogy of Morality, of morals, I believe in Essay 1, when Nietzsche says there is no being behind becoming, right? Everything is simply, right? I mean, there is no substratum, right? Everything
is an empty fiction.
Right, it's only the deed, right? The deed is everything, the doer is precisely a fiction, and so on, which is interesting because in Nietzsche there is also, right there is also the critique not only of metaphysics that he wants to destroy, but theology, the doer, even God, as such, is an afterthought, right? I mean, added to. Okay, so Marx, of course, I mean, Hegel, as we said already, Hegel says that there is no proposition of Heraclitus that he did not use in his Science of Logic, and then, of course, Marx, right? I mean, the labor is right? I mean, we said that the labor of fire, ultimately, right? That gives form to everything. That's a very Heraclitean moment, right? So, but in any case, so that's Heraclitus. For whom, of course, I mean, Heraclitus works through paradoxes, the beautiful, interesting paradoxes. There are not only logical paradoxes. The contradiction is not simply a logical, in the abstract sense of logic thing, but it belongs in the logical reality, right? I mean, it is reality itself that presents itself as in a contradictory way, right? And so the river, precisely, I mean, you can't step, we step into and we do not step into the same rivers, we are and we are not, okay? And it is this process, constant process of becoming, coming to be, of change, which is this going from what is to what is not, from what is not to what is, and so on and so forth, right? And that's also what Hegel says at the beginning of the Science of Logic: pure being and pure nothing, neither of them is the truth, but the truth is becoming, right? The unity of being and nothing, the fact that being has passed over into nothing and nothing into being, right? So, I mean, this is a very important moment that establishes precisely the dialectic, although as we see also Hegel very often says how Zeno in the Eleatic school is at the beginning of the dialectic, and that which continues then for Hegel in important ways even to the Sophists that we will cover today as well. But then Heraclitus and Parmenides, they usually, right, I mean, the simplistic view, right, is that they are opposite. I mean, so Heraclitus becomes simply the philosopher of change or becoming, and Parmenides the philosopher, the thinker of permanence, right? Everything flows, panta rei for Heraclitus, everything changes, nothing changes, I mean, everything stays the same. For Parmenides, nothing changes, nothing. As we said actually at the end of last class, right? Nothing can't even nothing or doesn't. Remember when we were playing with Heidegger's the things, right? But nothing doesn't even nothing, right? I mean, nothing is completely ruled out by Parmenides, although there may be different interpretations of Parmenides as well, right? I mean, but in any case, what does Parmenides do? which is also so important, among other things, is to say, before we ask the question, what is it, let's make sure that it is, that we know that it is, right? And we saw how this is an argument, right? A reasoning, type of reasoning that we find in Descartes, right? Mutatis mutandis, right? I mean, in Descartes, on the subjective, if you will, take of Descartes, same idea, right? I mean, the whatness and the thatness or something. Thatness comes before. We first have to make sure that something is, then ask the question as to its what or whatness, right? So Parmenides does that in, let's say, an objective fashion, speaking about what is, what then we call being in general, and Descartes will do so in relation to the I, the self, right? So the subjective dimension, same idea, right? So same format, in a sense, same type of argument. But in any case, Parmenides says, so let's make sure that we know this, right? And of course, the answer is very logical, again, in the most simplistic way, we might say it establishes the logic of identity or non-contradiction, which is the opposite of what Heraclitus apparently does, but there is more to it, as we saw last time. I'll go over that. But in any case, when he asks the question, is it or is it not, the decision must be made. And the answer is yes, it is. And it cannot not be, right? And so it must be, right? It must be, as we saw the other day, also because it can be. Remember, I want to go back to that question of the potential as rounding, if you want, all the other modalities of being, of reality, the other aspects of reality, right? Reality is, what is what can be. It can be, it must be, at the same time, what we have also here is this wonderful moment of convergence, right? We spoke about the ontology of convergence, of necessity and contingency. They come together in a very interesting way. In Parmenides, in the same way that the same will happen also with Spinoza. We touched on that. We can go back to that question, the necessity and freedom, that whereby God or nature, which is the one substance, ultimately produces everything, right? So in any case, is it or is it not? Yes, it is. It cannot not be, because if it were not, it would be nothing. But then if nothing is, what is it? If nothing is, it becomes something, right? Whether you like it or not. So ultimately, there is no exit from what is, from
There's a great saying in the movie, Cool Hand Luke, in a poker game. And it's sometimes nothing is a very cool hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. But it depends on what type of nothing, because we will see that the other as well. Right, so, but in any case, that's Parmenides' very strict and severe logic, and then again gives rise to this so-called logical identity of non-contradiction, which becomes abusive. It is abused as much as it is abusive, right? Then we have a problem of identity and so on, forgetting that, and there we need Heraclitus again, that identity is difference. Difference is identity, right? Which is, by the way, what Hegel also says in his wonderful way of saying that, right? He speaks of the logic of identity and non-identity, right? So which is difference, right? They will go together. But this is also true in Parmenides in many ways, right? Because what he rules out is this nothing. Remember, we said nothing is impossible, not in the sense of the adidas, we said right? In the sense that everything is possible, but in the sense that we cannot think of nothing, we cannot even or speak of nothing, although we do all the time, but certainly, as we will see also with the atomists, in a different way. So we should perhaps already say that there is this distinction between absolute nothing and relative nothing, okay? Which actually, maybe I can say that now, but it is hook on right? Hook on and may on, as we will see with the atomists later, right? I mean, if I remember the accents now. So hook on is that which is being, no? And the hook is the absolute negation, right? Absolute nothing in the absolute sense that the atomists are anticipating now. The atomists don't disagree with Parmenides in this respect. Absolute nothing is not and cannot be. But what they call then meon, which is a relative type of nothing, which is the same nothing, we might say, that we saw briefly in Lao Tzu. Remember that? So that empty space, the void, which will be equally constitutive of reality for the atomists as much as the atoms themselves, the full. Okay. So, but in any case, I'll go back to this. This is just an anticipation of what we'll see in a moment. But I mean, Parmenides therefore says, right? I mean, it is, of course, it is. It cannot not be. Nothing is not, and it can't be. Right, and so that's basically the division that we have, the distinction that we have in Parmenides, which also brings about the aporetic. We spoke about this last time. Moment in Parmenides, a contradiction, a difficulty, and everything. It is true because he does say himself that this sphere of a being, the plenum, which is full of what is, full of itself. There is no space whatsoever. So that makes motion impossible, motion which will be very important, of course, in the atomist theory. And that is then also, it is Zeno, Parmenides' student, who will draw in a paradoxical, again, fashion the consequences of that, and he will deny space altogether, he will deny movement, motion. Remember that the arrow which is always at rest, even when it seems like moving, and so on. But the question is that this closed sphere must be also interpreted. I mean, it is true that that's what, and that's there is a problem. It is true that that's what Parmenides says, or let's say seems to say, but actually we haven't spoken about that. But one philosopher in the Eleatic school, Milesians, right? We haven't even mentioned Milesians, but he was, although he was not from Elea, but from the place where Protagoras also was, the island. I don't know why it escapes me now, but the island, the Greek island of the coast of Turkey.
Ephesus. Ephesus.
No, that's Heraclitus was from Ephesus. I don't know why. Protagoras. Samos. Yeah, of course, Samos. Yeah. But I think Leucippus.
Samos is where Epicurus was from.
Right.
Yeah.
Milesians.
Yeah, Milesians too. But Epicurus as well came from Samos.
Okay, and Protagoras.
And Protagoras.
Samos. I don't know about Epicurus. Okay, so but in any case, I was just saying he is in a sense he's still in the Eleatic school. But he's the important
thing. That's where we should have the Greek Summer Institute, Samos, because it has a lot of Epicurean school and the garden and all this is going on there. Yeah.
Not this island right here?
Which one is it? Wait, I don't even see it.
It's not even on the map.
It's below Cops. It's below Greek.
Yeah.
It had no ancient thing, going on. This is a problem.
It's also one of the islands in Greece where the migration,
what's that?
Where the problems very often with in relation to migration.
Yeah, of course.
They're right across. I mean, you can see it. Huh? You can see it from Kazakh.
Oh yeah, from Kazakh. Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so but the important thing that I was mentioning about Milesians is that actually he gives this sphere the character of the infinite, right? I mean, it is not unthinkable. Of course, he already within the Eleatic tradition does that, but it makes sense because otherwise there would be.
It's the next one.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, but we didn't really,
Yeah.
Milesians or Samos, read. But in any case, there is this moment in Milesians which is important, right, which is ultimately not only a solution to the problem that objectively is there in Parmenides, but it is in a sense an extension of Parmenides' way of thinking, because of course Parmenides cannot mean, I know that this is a strong way to put it, because one can say, but he does say that, but this cannot be what he means, precisely because we saw last time there is this logical further difficulty that if that's what Parmenides is saying, he is destroying his own theory, right? Because then if it is a closed plenum, limited, then every time you have a limit, you must have also something beyond the limit, right? And that's something, what is it? If it's, again, because this is we spoke about beginning and end in the same way as we spoke about nothing, right? It's absolute and that's relative, but it's the same idea, right? Because if beyond the limit you have then, even in terms of time, the beginning of everything, the absolute beginning, what's there before, either something or nothing. That's right.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing here is the concept of telos. Because telos, when you translate telos from Greek, it means limit as well. So that you're doing a more non-teleological reading here in a certain way. If you go beyond the telos in a certain way, when you come up against the limit. So in a way, you're keeping it open-ended, which you refer to as possibility.
Exactly.
Actuality. And this is always,
right, and this is precisely what then, allows us to interpret Parmenides in a different way, different from maybe the usual way, but in a more meaningful way, I believe, and the correct way, precisely by saying, look, I mean, it's not the being, that which is, it's not simply that which is there in front of us, like with the limit and so on, but it is also the potential, precisely that, right, I mean, we often make reference to the universe in infinite expansion, and the comment that you made last time, I remember that was about that as well, the expansion into what, right? I mean, the where, what is the something like that. The place, if you want to read it, but in any case, that's the problem, okay? So that what Parmenides is doing is still working within an ontology of unrest, just like Heraclitus is. That's, I mean, the commonality between the two that someone like Heidegger points out and so on is precisely this. I mean, of course, Parmenides is not saying, just like Heraclitus, that everything flows in the same. I mean, certainly at the level of appearance, yes, and Parmenides does not deny appearance. I mean, who could do so? I mean, right, of course. And so it is precisely this question of the cycle, right, and the cycle of appearance that, Parmenides is pointing out, and he says, things change at that level, but it is also, the change we see at the level of, in the cycle of appearance, right? But it is also true that at the most, if you will, essential level, where Parmenides says that that which is remain fixed in the same place, and it is even there that there is agitation and unrest. The Pelein that we saw, that he uses, right, in that passage, Pelein used for the word to be, but it is, Heidegger says, it's the stirring and looming, and remember the Pelein, which is like the pelago, the sea, pelagos, right, the sea. I mean, this constant unrest, right, which again indicates precisely the fundamental moment, ontological moment of potentiality, without which there could be anything, right? So that's the question. Yes, it is, but because it can be, and then it must be as well. I don't know if I made this clear. That's the convergence, really. That, but you wanted to found the thing.
Oh yeah, it was in relation to Zeno. Actually,
Zeno, right.
but still, I mean, because he's
because he
He
goes
was Parmenides anyway, so.
right.
It was just what is inextricable from where what is.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I like that very much because it is precisely, and again, this is of course Zeno drawing the implications, but it is already there in Parmenides. If one reads Parmenides, of course, the proper way, according to his logic, which is not simply to say, either A or not A, because that leads us nowhere, right? I mean, this logical. So, I mean, that's what's really fruitful and important in Parmenides. And it is ultimately, what I also want to say, that's the central moment in Presocratic philosophy. We are moving, Presocratic philosophy, we are moving toward the end. But this question of unrest, notwithstanding all the changes that we saw also in the interpretation of Hegel and Burnet of the Presocratics, but remember that ultimately that cycle that we saw to begin with, especially with Anaximander and the fragment, very important fragment, right? But even with Thales, in the description that Aristotle gives of Thales, but Anaximander, right? The things that are perish into those from which they came to be, right? So, and then this happens according to necessity. Right, for Anaximander too, and then of course there is this paradigm, if you will, is in place from the beginning to the end in the Presocratic tradition. By then we found the same in different ways in Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and so on, right? We spoke about Anaxagoras last time. There too, in Anaxagoras, I don't know, we spoke about that fragment that says the visible is a vision of the invisible, right? I mean, what appears is a vision of what does not appear, right? Remember? Which is, by the way, also, Heidegger says something very similar, and maybe usually one refers to Heidegger in this respect, right? Heidegger says at one point that there is always something that doesn't appear in the appearance, right? What is that something that in the appearance does not appear? But that's what Anaxagoras already says in that beautiful fragment. And this is ultimately, again, whatever we want to call it, the framework, the paradigm, the metaphysics, the ontology of a Presocratic philosophy is that is not to say that there is no, each one of them gives important and singular contributions to the question, but the question is still the same. Right? What is it? Then we have this important further question by Parmenides, is it or is it not? And then we go back to what is it, right? Parmenides precisely answers, it is it itself, it is, what is, right? But still the question there, and then we also mention the question that how this develops then later into the question why, which is already there in Parmenides, right? Why is there something rather than nothing? Given that nothing would be simpler, well, because there is no exit from something, because there is something, because there must be something, and let's not forget, there can be something, okay? So that's what then it becomes, right, the fundamental metaphysical question. Okay, so, and then I also mentioned again, just mentioned Empedocles and Anaxagoras, but so we start on the Atomists, and then briefly something about Protagoras of the Sophists, right? So I don't know if we want to read first what Hegel says, or maybe some of the fragments or testimonia relating to Leucippus and Democritus. It seems to me that Burnet actually has the chapter on Leucippus of Miletus, right? The same city where of course, the first three philosophers came from. So he gives more importance, right? He focuses on Leucippus, perhaps Hegel does more on Democritus, and of course Democritus then usually people refer, and not to read Democritus in relation to when they speak about the atomists. Also, let's remember, because you mentioned Epicurus, Michael, but of course Marx, right, he wrote this doctoral dissertation on
1841.
the difference between
the Epicurean
and
the
Democritus
Democritian theories of
right.
nature. Of nature.
And I was looking at that again the other day, but he does say that there is an essential difference. I mean, we are essential,
Yes.
which is, by the way, an expression, a phrase that he uses often, because in the Bruno also he uses the expression essential difference marks.
This is Hegel speaking through Marx in some way.
Yeah, Hegel
Because
speaking
Hegel
through
is
Marx, yeah, right.
who uses the term essential difference
Right.
to get outside of just clear, distinct, or just simple difference.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, which is very important, but it is, I was just saying, because even in the introduction to the Bruno speaking about the modes of production, right? I mean,
Right.
different modes, he uses this Marx, this expression, essential difference. He said there is one there too. I mean, we're not going to go into that. I mean, whether it's Epicurus or Lucretius, right? Because Lucretius, a couple of centuries after, right, in already the Roman context, I mean, in the wonderful, on the nature poem, on the nature of things, he gives, by his own admission, he's giving an exposition of the philosophy of Epicurus. But there are many similarities actually between the atomists and then Epicurus Lucretius, although certainly the difference, one of the essential differences is this kind of the swerve of the atom.
The swerve is very important. The swerve is very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Epicurus. In Epicurus.
In Epicurus, yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah.
crucial. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is where, yeah, exactly, Althusser has
There's a nice passage.
and on the Elliot Torah, the contingent, right?
That's again a moment of convergence of the necessary and the contingent. Josh, you want to read the
Well, I mean, I have to figure out where, because he kind of goes on a little bit. But he does make this distinction between the Epicurean swerve. I mean, he starts off by talking about the rain, which is interesting because that's how the atoms fall through the void.
Right.
Then he talks about the comparison between Epicurus and Heidegger, which is interesting too, but let me see.
Yeah, it's horrible the way they've done this place here. Yeah. No, I mean, they don't know how to regulate the heat, they don't know how to do anything.
None of the water fountains.
Yeah, none of the water fountains are working.
Okay.
You found?
He says, Epicurus tells us that before the formation of the world, an infinity of atoms were falling parallel to each other in the void. They still are. This implies that before the formation of the world, there was nothing, and also that all elements of the world existed from all eternity, before any world ever was. It also implies that before the formation of the world, there was no meaning, neither cause nor end, or reason or unreason. The non-interiority of meaning is one of Epicurus' basic theses, by virtue of which he stands opposed to both Plato and Aristotle. Then the Klingemann supervenes.
Yeah.
I shall leave it to the specialist to decide to introduce the concept of the Klingemann present in the Lucretius, but absent from the fragments of Epicurus. The fact that this concept was introduced suggests that it proved indispensable, if only on reflection, to the logic of Epicurus' thesis. The Klingemann was the infinitesimal swerve, as small as possible. No one knows where, or when, or how it occurs, or what causes an atom to swerve from its vertical fall in the void, and breaking breaking that parallelism in an almost negligible way at one point introduces an encounter with the atom next to it, and from encounter to encounter a pile-up and the birth of a world, that is to say, of the agglomeration of atoms induced in a chain reaction by the initial spur of an encounter.
And that is the problem which is in a sense created by Epicurus himself, because I mean ultimately the question of the clinic and as well, right? It's which is the subjective type of take that Marx seems to also appreciate, right? I mean, but it is only because in the theory of Epicurus, then precisely the atoms would otherwise fall in a bottomless state of no beginning, no end, and so on. And so you need this very slight movement so that they can bump into each other and then make up the compound bodies. However, I think Bruno says something, but again, it's always difficult and maybe makes no sense to draw things in speaking about these things. But if this is everything that is the void and each X is an atom, right? I mean, in the state of agitation that we have already with Democritus, no, and Leucippus, they do, in any case, ultimately bump into one another and make up compound bodies, make up things, right? So, in a sense, I mean, yes, that is, of course, if we understand that, and of course, this is open, it's not closed. I mean, this is just for the sake of drawing. But if the case is actually that the atoms constantly fall to the ground which doesn't exist, a ground which is not there, then of course we have the problem, how do they encounter one another, and so we have the phenomenon. Yes, that makes sense, yes. But in any case, that's the idea. In the Atomists, however, in this sense, I mean, if we read especially book 1, I believe, of Lucretius on the nature of things, we find that there are many similarities. Of course, it's more not developed, and but we can perhaps read because basically all the fragments here. There is a long section in the curved reader on Democritus and Leucippus, and maybe then we can go to some of the Hegel and the Brunet interpretation. I mean, first of all, page 110, again, I don't know what the page would be for
This was the first two words.
Oh, yeah,
yeah, what are the first two words?
So, like the passage 1, you have 67b2. You see that? Well, this is just to read that, right? I mean, nothing happens at random, but all things are, as a result of reason and by necessity, which is, again, I wanted to read this more. It's not, I don't particularly want to problematize the question of what it is for things to happen at random, but the question of necessity that we saw over and over again, right? Starting from with Anaximander and then the necessity that we saw also in being, and necessity that we also saw, that is the destiny that we interpreted in the sense of the Moira as that which we then made a reference to Emanuele Severino, and he's not the only one, but certainly, destiny, fate as that which always stays, right? I mean, the absolutely staying, right, which is again, the eternity of everything that is, right, the cosmos and so on, okay? And so in passage 2, I just simply say this is Diogenes Laertius, that this ends with the idea, right, because we will see this is repeated over and over again in these passages about the full and the void, but just the last sentence that says that Leucippus was the first to make the atom's first principles. So we're still within the framework and paradigm that we saw from the beginning, the first principle meaning the arche. Right? I mean, we already saw that the first philosophers had one element, it wasn't element really, right, but one type of arche. Then we saw Anaxagoras, Empedocles, Anaxagoras who had more than one, Empedocles 4, Anaxagoras all not the seeds and so on, and the atoms, in a sense the seeds in Anaxagoras would be a prefiguration of the atoms in the atomists, right? And it is the first principle. But it's not the only constituent, right? It's not the only element constituting reality, because the void is as constitutive as the full, which is the atom, right? Maybe we said that last time, but we remember that atomos is uncuttable, right? In Greek, atomos. Maybe we read Aristotle from Metaphysics, right? Maybe Josh, you want to read this? 3?
What is it, 3?
Yeah.
Okay. It's Leucippus, right?
And then we go over.
How do you say it, Leucippus?
Yeah, Leucippus. Yeah, I think so. In Burnett is spelled with a K, but I think that the pronunciation would be C or Cook. I don't know if it's Cook. Leucippus.
Well, he's using, I guess he's using the kappa in Greek. The kappa, so they would lose.
Leucippus.
Leucippus.
I don't know, because in Italian we always say Leucippus.
It's not C, it's not C in the Greek. C is translated.
Right.
So it must be the kappa. It's probably lambda, epsilon, kappa.
Right, so much so that Burnett gives that.
It's probably more closer
the
Okay.
Doesn't really matter.
Let's say Leucippus.
He's not in the class. Disrespect him by mispronouncing his name.
No.
Leucippus and his associate Democritus declared the full and the empty void to be the elements, calling the former what is, tuon, and the other what is not, to meon.
Yeah, to, it would be to the article, to on, what is ton, and tomeon, what is not.
Okay. Of these, the one, what is full and solid, the other, what is not, is empty, void, and rare. This is why they say that what is no more than what is not, because the void is no less than body is. These are the material causes of existing things. They declare that the differences among these are the cause of the rest. Moreover, they say that the differences are 3: shape, arrangement, and position. For they say that what is differs only in rhythm, touching, and turning. And of these, rhythm is shape, touching is arrangement, and turning is position. For A differs from N in shape, AN from NA in arrangement, and Z from N in position. Concerning the origin and manner of motion in existing things, these men too, like the rest, lazily neglected to give an account.
Yeah, okay, so there is so much already in this passage only. Starting from the end, because the question of motion, I will be then it is taken up by both problematized by Burnett and too. The question of the origin of motion, the source of motion, but there is no. In the Democritus and Leucippus, there is no source. There is motion, which is not conceptually an important thing, right? So you don't need this. It's like when we speak about not the principle of individuation, and then we cross out, as many people do not, principle. You don't need principle as Gilbert Simondon does to begin with, right? You have individuation, the individuating process, right? Same idea here. You have motion, you have agitation, right? So much for Aristotle's accusation of these people are lazy too. Hegel is also kind of hard on the atomists. He liked the Sophists, right?
Yeah, but at least he allows for movement and motion.
Yeah.
In Hegel does. In interpretation, whereas here Aristotle is saying that that's not even here, which obviously is. No? The principle of motion.
Right, no, but it is rather that there is motion, but not something that stands before motion.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that would be not the problem. Yeah. Yes. So, but in any case, so I go over. So again, what is not, ton, tomeon, and one is full. What is full and solid? The other, what is not, is empty. Again, I like to. Make this reference again to the wonderful chapter from Lao Tzu that we read, because there is here something very, very, strikingly very similar, right? There too, the vase, remember the empty space inside is equally constitutive of the reality of the thing, the vase, the room, such just as much as the material, right? The food. Okay. So, and then the body, then the boy molested, then body is, and I want just to say that then later we will see how both Hegel and Burnett point out the importance of the metaphysics of the body, not starting with the atomists, precisely. Okay.
See if I can open this window.
I think we got them screwed shut.
And then we have to just maybe take off your jacket, and, because I'm better now. Michael, if you take off your jacket,
What did you say?
take off your jacket.
Yeah, I'm gonna take off my jacket, but at the same time, I'm not like that.
Yeah, no, I'm
It's
much
the
better
heat,
now.
it's the code, yeah.
So, huh?
Yeah, no, it's just the way the heat is.
Right. So in any case, this question also, this is also even beautiful, we might say, but the question of shape, arrangement, and position, which is not spoken about here by Aristotle, and then all of them, of course. I mean, they both Hegel and Burnett will remark in important ways on this. But it is an interesting, it's almost a syntax of, we say ontology, but also almost a syntax of reality of the real, right? And, okay. So then maybe
What's interesting how she puts this together, I mean, she doesn't put Epicurus next to Democritus, in a way, It's interesting how she just takes Leucippus, right, and Democritus and puts them together as the atomists.
but because the Epicurus is not even included.
No, it's very interesting that this is exclusion.
That's not how it used to be? Or not how
No, I mean, he's not included. I mean, it's a
Well,
censorship.
because he's not in the Presocratic.
Yeah, he's not considered a pre-Socratic.
I
So the teaching of philosophy, there's a radical move here that should be considered, which is that the teaching of philosophy has always been through the regular pre-Socratics, right? But you should begin with the atomists, right, in many ways, which is what Marx does.
And the Presocratic and the
Why?
Presocratics.
Well, I mean, you're gonna leave them in, but you at least have the atomists, that open up the possibility of contingency and the swerve and transformation in a very different way, right? Especially in the Epicurean tradition.
Or if you want to focus on that, but that's post-Aristotelian. I'm not sure, but the question is, we get to the atomists in a meaningful way, I believe, by
the Presocratics.
I think so, because Heraclitus, Parmenides, not also the others, but I think so, yes.
Fair enough.
And actually, one of them, I believe, Burnett says that Democritus is not properly speaking. I mean, certainly the Sophists are not Presocratics, and they're not even included in Burnett. But Democritus and Leucippus in terms of problems and the way they deal with these problems, they can very well be included in this show, I believe, at the end of the tradition. But also because they precisely give an answer, if you will, a solution to the question of the apparent split between Heraclitus and Parmenides. So because here we will have a recuperation of nothing in a relative sense, neon, right? which is already what Heraclitus speaks about, and we are not. I mean, nothing is part of. And also, so they and still at the same time they take into account the exclusion of absolute nothing that is so important for Parmenides, right? So, and there is a relationship between the atomists and the Eleatic school, right? So they say, yeah, I mean, in a sense, we might say, they say, yes, Parmenides is right. Of course, there is no absolute nothing. However, there must be relative nothing because there must be void for motion. That's the way. The problem is the problem precisely of motion. I mean, otherwise you can know motion like we saw with Parmenides, Zeno, right? The paradoxes, but then that's not a description of reality. Right? So to say that the atomists basically bring together, and then others will do the same later, but they bring together Parmenides and Heraclitus means that they give perhaps a more accurate description of reality, no? I mean, they account for reality in a fuller way, maybe, although again, Heraclitus does as well, and Parmenides and Heraclitus together, but I think that that's precisely what they say, you know, in a simplistic way. I say again, right, I mean, Parmenides is right, absolute nothing is not and I cannot be. However, we have the empty space, we have void, and that is actually equally constitutive of reality, you know, as important as what is, right? Because what is not, it is only because it's not full. It's empty, but again, of course, I mean, maybe we spoke about this, right? But we can also problematize, I mean, not problematize, but describe this in terms of the way in which, in language, right, common language and loose language, and that we use the word nothing, right? Maybe we said that. I mean, I can, push the desk against the wall. Why? Because there is nothing there. But precisely, this is not nothing, right? Maybe we said this, right? There is space. There is air,
there is friction,
and maybe there is a virus also. So it's not nothing,
just
right?
air.
So all the vampires.
So that's the idea. So that and again, of course, I mean, maybe I said this last time, but just you know, what happened? Nothing. How can nothing happen? Of course, I mean, we use this language, but the language of nothing reflects actually, ultimately, the fact that in reality there is a type of, I don't know if this is a precise language, a type of nothing, which is not nothing at all, but it is precisely some type of absence of the full, right? The absence of what otherwise might be present, or whatever it is, the void that again we saw in Lao Tzu, which we usually overlook as non-important, but without which reality could not even happen, could not unfold. And this is not only at the level of, well, I can push the desk against the wall because there is nothing there, meaning there is no other piece of furniture, but everything we do, and this is, remarked upon in many ways by many people. Of course, I mean, in the tradition of philosophy, I mentioned Lao Tzu, but Leopardi in some ways too. But think about even, and that goes back to Zeno in a sense. When I walk and don't walk at the same time, because every time, that I take a step on precisely completely there. I mean, I occupy a space equal to my body. When I speak and do not speak. Right, so, because this raises a very important question that I want to remark on right now, which is the question of the potentiality not to, right? I mean, what seems to be negative, but it is not negative in that absolute sense. When I say, even in language, when I speak and not speak at the same time, meaning that, a sentence must have pauses. And even a word, between one syllable and the other, you must pause, because otherwise you wouldn't make any sense, right? I mean, you wouldn't be uttering a word, but simply maybe sound, whatever noise. Am I making this?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is always there. I mean, the presence of the negative, nothing, is always there. I mean, we easily overlook that, right? But it is precisely what we should instead more carefully consider, right? So, I mean, we can this is of course very, very important. We can. Okay, so then otherwise we can read more.
What did Leopardi say about that? You said you could mention Leopardi.
Well, he was. I think that the thing that I was, the association that I made was about something that he says about writing, how you can, write constantly. You have to stop. I mean, everything you do also requires these moments in which you do nothing, almost, I say, in the Taoist sense of doing nothing, right? Wu Wei, which is the doing or not doing. Or in any case, the empty space in between, right? Which, again, when I read that, I thought about these other further examples of even speaking, and walking and so on and so forth. But it was about writing.
It's interesting.
Is it also that we partly know that there is nothing by sort of moving into displacing that nothing, right? That's how we know there is nothing. No. Like when we were walking across the room or speaking or whatever, the filling up of the nothing is the way that you know there was a nothing there before, right?
Right.
Or the nothing gives shape to the something.
Or vice versa, But you could sort of
Yeah, no,
reverse
no,
that formulation.
Right.
And have the same thing be true. Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that is to say precisely how nothing, in this sense, is precisely the way Lao Tzu puts it, simply what is not there, what is not there yet, but it is that without which what is there could not be there. Right? In order for me to move into that, there must be precisely this empty space. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the problem with Parmenides, because if everything is full, right? I mean, if this room itself was full of something, then we couldn't be, right? I mean, we can be inside because, as Lao Tzu says, there is empty space, precisely. So it is in the because you say moving to say makes me think. If I may,
I just happened upon this phrase, but it's the relative nothing is animated as nothing by the something that moves into.
Yeah, I mean the moving into because what you say makes me think of the use in which the way in which Sartre uses nothing, precisely in being and nothing, being and nothing, right? That there is this nothing at the core of being, but it is also very much so. It's also very important because it is the future, right? In front of us, then of course in the existentialist tradition, that is what gives us anxiety and so on and so forth. But it is freedom. Freedom. This
Well, it's temporality
problematic.
first. Temporality and then freedom.
Right.
Freedom of the future.
Right.
Which is very frightening.
Yeah.
Which is part of the ontology of naturalization, and brilliant ontology of anguish. Really the anguish of
Because you step into something which is, of course, the temporality, and it is something that is not yet.
Not yet, and
unknown, precisely, and it is something that must be then. You can then speak about this with the poetic ontology. You must make it yourself. You must build it. Make something of it. Just like Sartre says that we make ourselves. Precisely, right?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Lacanian psychoanalysis is anxiety is not within you. Anxiety is always future. It's not an anxiety about the past or something that you experience. In a way, it's taking away from always standard psychoanalytic discourse that somehow you going through a trauma again, or you're repeating something in the past and all of this in a psychic automatic way. Really what the great fear is the future, and that's what the anxiety is predicated on. It's not an anxiety about something you had done in the past or repeating yourself. So it's again this unknown, uncharted of both the what is and the what is not. You're working through this in this temporal division, right? So this is, really the,
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's right. And that is then ultimately it says that this nothing is certainly that we always face nothing in that sense, and therefore that's speaking about the future, but the past also has now come, has now become nothing in the sense that even Heraclitus says, right? So again,
but you see
what
these
we are, the temporality, that you say, is really this threshold, this being right between the no longer of the past and the not yet of the future. So we are, basically surrounded by nothing at the individual level, the collective level, the level of the human, the human experience, but at the cosmic level as well.
Right.
I mean, not nothing in the sense of absolute nothing, but in this sense of the possibility of moving into this unfolding, this moving into not a what, a where, which is there, a pre-existing one, but a self-producing one, a poietic one, right? I mean, this constant making of itself, which is the whatever.
Right. So I was just going to say, one of the arguments that Sartre has with William Faulkner is that Sartre says he has a bad metaphysics because the past is not even past in Faulkner's fiction. It kind of lives there, it is not part of a future, in a way. Like this is very interesting the way he criticizes Faulkner's, fiction. If the past is still the past. Right? And there is no future for the characters. It's going to be very interesting the way he does this, the metaphysics of William Faulkner. In a way, who's probably, arguably one of the greatest novelists of the 20th century, had experiments with time. But the issue here, going back to what you're saying, is if the not yet is really there, Faulkner is not a believer in the not yet. In a certain way, or a craftsman of the not yet, in a way, and that's another.
No, but I mean, again, because maybe that's okay, right? Another association that comes because of your mentioning Faulkner is that because I included that in the manuscript that I'm revising now, but in the wonderful book called As I Lie Dying, right? Small.
As I Lay Dying.
Right, and there is this wonderful adjective that Faulkner uses, unalone, to be unalone. And it is one of the inventive negatives of Faulkner. I read an article as well, so it's a well-known thing. But it is amazing, the use again of the negative, not to say something which, again, reduces everything to absolute nothing, but to point out a different aspect of reality that seems to be negative, but it ultimately is not negative. I mean, to be alone and to be unalone is right. I mean, it's a wonderful. So I mean, again, to go back to the question of the void, the empty space, what is not as equally constitutive of reality. And to link this precisely to the discourse of the potential. Because there too, I mean, usually, or if we use the word possibility instead of potentiality, usually, right, the common sense is that things are possible, but we usually forget that what is possible can also, right, what can be can also not be, right? That's the full, formula, let's put it this way, of a contingency that must include potentiality and the potentiality not to.
Right.
Right?
And phrases like the impossibility of possibility.
Yeah,
phrases that come up and
instructive. Right, and to go back, to the question of, I was saying before, I mean, this that too, that's another concept which that is misused, abused, and so on, very often not understood. Freedom is not necessarily a nice thing, it is a complication, no? In the human condition. It is this indeterminacy that we are constantly facing. I mean, we are back to the question of the fuse and another thing, that we face, and so on, this indeterminacy, that's what freedom is, contingency, therefore, right? I can, but I can also not do what I can do, and so on and so forth, right? I can do it, but I can also not do it. And that's the indeterminacy that then creates, of course, all the problems of anxiety or so many other problems. I mean, the fact that just like there is no exit from what is in the logic of metaphysics of Parmenides, there will be, for Sartre, there is no exit from precisely freedom, right? I mean, in that paradoxical way that, again...
Well, the no exit is that inability to face the freedom, too, of the indeterminacy.
Yeah,
the contingency, which is what happens in the play, as you know.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is his illustration of such and such a thing like that. Within Hess and Garcia.
No, I know. Yeah, no, but you're right. But I wasn't using no exit.
Yeah, no, I understand. The no escape is
right? I mean, we are condemned to be free, right? We are not free not to be free. Right, so there is no exit. Oh, so it's a nice, we are free. No, the question, as Sartre says, the question is always wrongly posed when people ask, of course, it's not a question of free will. It's not speaking at all about free will. It's not a question of being free or not free. It is rather that we are not free not to be free, which means that we are always in this state of indeterminacy. Precisely, and unrest, and with the task that we always have to make something of ourselves.
Right.
And we can say that this is what this is what the cosmos maybe does. We will go back to
this. And hence the name of our journal, Situations, right? In some ways, in a determinate situation, there's always freedom. In the Sartrean moment. Right? The situation is determined, you're bounded, you have the structural moment, but there's still agency, which you don't get in the Althusserian school, which you don't get in other schools of structural Marxism, or in many of the internationalist examples. So this is an interesting thing, the whole question, again, of agency and freedom coming up. And why we're always in this inaction, right? Because of the terror of freedom. I would call freedom terror, really terror. You're terrified of the freedom.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
Oh my God, am I here all alone?
And that's the idea, because as you say, Michael, and those who criticize Sartre as being voluntaristic.
It's bullshit.
Right? Because
the voluntarism is William James.
On
free will. That's a volunteer.
But because they missed the importance, precisely as to say, of the situation, we can elaborate on this even more. But and I completely agree with you. So it is from within the situation that freedom precisely happens, and this freedom is always this question of being indeterminate, this indeterminacy, and so but that's right. So that's what it means, that we cannot stop and we can.
Hey Alex, I'll call you back. I'm in a meeting. I'm sorry, but I wanted to get information from you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you a lot. Bye bye. Yeah.
And this is also, we may elaborate on this, of course, even in Sartre, his own, of course, very original singular take on this, but in Heidegger too, the two concepts of thrownness on the one hand and then a project.
Yes, both have that in mind too. Sartre and Heidegger do come together on that level, on that existentiality level. It's the Gevortheit, right?
The
project.
The
projection, right?
Which becomes very important in certainly it is already in Heidegger. traditional phenomenology
Right.
and existentialism. And I don't know if we spoke about this here, and I don't know if you are aware of the linguistic and etymological intimacy between relation between these two words, right? Because jack, right, and throne are the same.
Same, of
right?
course.
Because jack is the past participle of the Latin word for throne, to throne, right? So throne to throne,
Right.
jack is thrown forward, right? Like
Right,
in jack
right,
is thrown
right.
inside and so on.
Absolutely.
So jack is thrown forward, and the idea is that we find ourselves thrown in a situation, right? The situation that you were saying, and the situation to begin with in which we find ourselves is certainly not of our choosing at all, right? I mean, our birth, right? The family, the community, the language, the religion, and so on and so forth, whatever other thing that we find ourselves in. There is a problem with this being thrown because it may have some biblical type of connotation, maybe like the Garden of Eden, this. Maybe the eviction of Adam and Eve, right, thrown out. But I don't know if we are thrown, but that's not literally what Heidegger means. We find ourselves there in a situation which is not of our choosing at all. But starting from there, and then this is especially not only, but the question of authenticity, but Sartre says, then we will start making ourselves. So the choice that we make is not that we make a choice like we change clothes in the morning, right? I mean, Sartre speaks of an original choice, right? Which can be changed when it's different. So, whereby then it's not that, so from the thrownness, the situation in which we find ourselves, it is not the case that then we simply, have a project and we become a project, and because then there is also this question of being always outside of oneself and so on, and we become a project, and that's what the question of. So it's not choice in any liberal sense of free choice, free will of I do as I please and so on and so forth, right? I mean, it is rather the question of maybe. The word preference would be better in the
what's kind of interesting here to me is that on one hand you have, two powerful movements, revolutionary movements at work. On the one hand, you have the conservative revolution who speaks of thrownness like Heidegger, right? In a way, in terms of the world and, one building one's project and authenticity around that thrownness. By facing up to it, by resolve. That's his language, his resolution, right? And one makes a resolution, not a choice. One is resolved towards the thrownness and the being towards that. On the other hand, you have the left, in a way, where Sartre argues against the communists, right? The orthodoxy and the dogmatic Marxists, that what's being left out is the human project. Right, because everything becomes orthodoxy that is determinate, right, in every situation, and there really is no freedom until that realm of necessity is passed through, in a sense, which is a much more literal reading of Marx, in terms of realms and all of this.
Right.
So you have these two political moments too, because Sartre was not a member of the conservative revolution like a Heidegger and a Juncker, political. I'm just drawing the political implications of this. Where in Sartre's case, obviously this was the bridge to subjectivity in Marxism, a real bridge, right? In many ways, right? And then, ultimately we still have to think of freedom in this way, right?
Right.
Because for Heidegger, freedom is really much more of letting things be as they are.
Right.
Freedom is an anti-domination. It's an anti-domination of both nature and the other, right? Whereas in Sartre, the project sometimes leads to a kind of domination or a kind of, concrete relations with others that are built on, at some level, sadomasochistic behaviors, all of this plays out, as descriptively and illustratively in Being and Nothingness.
Being
right? In that early work. Right? Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
And
No, you just look at the characters too, that say it's hard, like Orestes, he uses the language of the ancients, right? And Orestes in the Condemned of Altona, right, basically says to Zeus, who is dictating everything, who is, quote unquote, the law of the moment, Orestes says, no, I am my freedom, right? And no longer am I a thinking thing, but I am a freedom, right, in its own ways. So the Cartesian liberty has now become, quote unquote, the project.
Right.
Subjectivity.
Which becomes also a Promethean type.
And a Promethean moment.
No, but in
that's the myth here. In both cases, I think, too.
Right.
It is Promethean, since you work on labor of fire, and you use that kind of Promethean, myth. The myth, you too. No, I mean, Marx as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you have this Promethean myth, it's always operative.
And to go back to what you even said earlier, and then we elaborated on this divisional situation, and then
the determinate situation,
which is another way of where we can appreciate again this convergence that we were speaking about of necessity and contingency.
Yes, I agree with you. And to put it in today's political terms, the most terrifying thing to most people in the United States right now politically is to form a real party. Because it takes hard work, it's terrifying, and one is free of having to say, oh, it's the DNC that did this, or it's this that did this. This whole attitude of excuse in politics, that it's the Russians on the one hand controlling something, to the DNC, etc., is gone. Then you're terrified, how do we really build a real movement, right? Without those pre-existent structures that we have. And this to me is a very interesting way to look at politics. Why aren't these things really done? We talk about it all the time. The left is always saying, oh, we're going to do strategic moves. But the whole sense of strategic moves, to me, takes away from a lot of your lecture tonight, which to me is about contingency, really in general, right? And the swerve of the atoms and chance and chance encounters. That none of this is really considered in terms of the political sphere, and never really spoken to. It's so much easier to talk about how bad Biden is now, right? Right? Or how, instead of saying we need groundwork in terms of the terror of really creating a movement. Right? The Leninist break, if you will, with this, finally. Or the break with reformism, once again. And say, we're not fucking reformists, we're looking for little, peanuts being thrown and crumbs of health care or whatever, or some kind of bullshit like this. We're revolutionaries. And revolutionaries, accept the fact that they are, living in this kind of terror, right? That they have to accept this and take it upon themselves. And this is what we have, I think in a way, is a real failure on the left, is that there's an inability to take risks. There's this inability to take, I'm not talking about just risk out there, you throw a cocktail in the middle of Times Square at the police. This is not how we're going to start.
Of course. I want to say that that it's very much connected to the issue of techniques of servitude on which
yes, of course.
we have worked with Peter, right? And the question of precisely why then this strange kind of choice of servitude, but then in this sense also what Frederick Lordon says in
the Willing Slaves of Capital,
which is a mistranslated title, right? It's what in French is the desire, and I don't remember. It's a different title in French, but there is always passionate servitude. It's never voluntary, so it's not a voluntaristic thing. It is precisely that's where the work must be done.
A fear of freedom.
Exactly.
Fear of freedom is what.
Right, exactly. And this brings us back, in a sense, if not to the Atomists, to Epicurus and Lucretius, for whom fear. Lucretius says we must expel.
Yes.
Ignorance, and therefore the fear becomes the
absolutely.
So forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you also wanted to maybe apply to.
No.
Okay. Maybe we can.
I mean, but this is good.
psychological.
No, we continue, I'm sorry.
I'm getting too popular in my old age.
Maybe I read this from, again, Aristotle, 5, right? And this for us is 568a 37.
This is on Democritus,
Yeah.
from Aristotle, from the Metaphysics.
Yeah, I see.
This is on Democritus, but it's quoted by Simplicius in the commentary on Aristotle's on the Relevance. So, but it would be Aristotle's work on Democritus, precisely. Democritus believes that the nature of the eternal things is small substances, usiai, which is substance, and there is a footnote that says, of course, that there is a connection between usiai and on, which is infinite in number. Okay, so this they are infinite in number. As a place for this, he hypothesizes something else, infinite in size, and he calls this the void. Okay, so we have again the same idea. Okay, the full, the compact, what is and what is not, right? The void. He calls that the substances are so small that they escape our senses, and this is also important. This is remarked upon also by, I believe, Burnett, right? I mean, who also speaks about the metaphysics of the body, but they are, right? I mean, they are not part of the visible, tangible, of course. I mean, we don't see them, but the compound bodies, then, yes, we see and touch. He calls that the substances, yes, they escape our senses, they have all kinds of forms and shapes and differences in size. We just saw this in the passage you read. But I want to skip 2 lines, right, where after the comma he says and, because this is what's, I believe, important here. As they move, right, as they move, they strike against one another and become entangled, right, in a way that makes them be in contact and close to one another, but does not make anything out of them that is truly one, and so on. Okay, so, but there is this agitation, this movement, this motion whereby they strike one another. Okay, I mean, we made reference to this, we saw the complication that in Epicurus, and the solution in Epicurus. I skip 5 lines again. At the end of that line, after the period, he says, so he thinks that they cling, right, to each other and stay together until some strong necessity, again, comes along from the environment and shakes them and scatters them apart. Okay, which is, again, I believe, not to say everything is the same, to reduce all to the same, but it is, right, the framework in place, the framework that we saw, right, we have seen throughout the Presocratic time. He describes the generation and its contrary separation, not only for animals, but also for plants, cosmoi, and altogether for all our bodies, perceptible bodies, okay? And then this one is still Simplicius. And by the way, the last 4 lines that I read, I said that, but again, the closest perhaps reference would be precisely Anaximander, not in the fragment that we read, that is really foundational, not in the whole tradition. Okay. So then we have this 1, 6, some of the things we have seen, but it might be good to read it again. Leucippus did not follow the same route as Parmenides and Xenophanes concerning things that are, but seemingly the opposite one. For while they made the universe one, immovable, ungenerated, and limited, and did not even permit the investigation of what is not, he posited the atoms as infinite and never-moving elements, with an infinite number, so the motion is within themselves already, with an infinite number of shapes on the grounds that they are no more like this than like that, and because he observed the coming to be and change are unceasing among the things that are. and we might recall Anaxagoras' correction, so to speak, of this when he says it's not a matter of coming to be and passing away, but of a combination of right. Okay. So, but here too we have the same type of combination theory. Further, he posited that what is no more than what is not, and both are equally causes of things that come to be. This is very important, right? I mean, this is really the key element in the philosophy of the atomists. For supposing the substance of atoms to be compact and full, he said it is what is, and that it moves in the void, which he called what is not, and which he declares is no less than what is. Okay, so what is not is no less than what is. That's really important, right? So his associate Democritus of Abdera likewise posited the full and the void as principles, of which he calls again the former what is and the latter what is not. For positing the atoms as matter for the things that are, they generate the rest by means of their differences. They are freely, so that already written, turning and touching, that is shape, position and arrangement. And then there is this question of movement, and I skip 2 lines, the sentence ends with different combination. Okay, so there is this agitation and then this combination ontology, and the syntax, like we said, I mean, especially shape, not position, arrangement, does. Since, maybe we can read another one, but this is important, right? I mean, then there are some other passages that are very similar, but I would, because I didn't have the time, but I would at least maybe read some lines from 7, the next one, which is again Aristotle, this time from on generation and corruption. Okay, should I read this or some?
Sure.
Okay. No, because maybe I skip a few lines, but that works okay.
Skip around, yeah, it's fine.
So Leucippus and Democritus have accounted for all things very systematically. That's Aristotle says so, and in a single theory. Okay, then the next sentence: for some of the early philosophers held that what is necessarily one and immovable. Read Parmenides, of course, right? For the void is not, and motion is impossible without a separate void. That's the problem, right? The problem that they inherit, let's say, from the Eleatic school is precisely this, that there is no motion, right? So they need the void, and that's what Aristotle is telling us, right? Nor can there be many things without something to keep them apart, which is precisely space. And which is, we can say. But Leucippus thought he had arguments that assert what is generally granted to perception, not abolishing coming to be, perishing, motion, or a plurality. Right? So, I mean, the question of the separation and the coming together, the gathering, we might say again, that we used before. And so then agreeing on these matters with the phenomena and agreeing with those who support the one that is the Eleatics, that there could be no motion without void. Of course, he asserts that, again, that's the important point we saw before, he asserts that void is what is not, and that nothing of what is not. Since what strictly is completely full. But this kind of thing is not one thing, but things that are infinite in number and so on, and they move in the next sentence in the void. In parentheses he says for there is void. Okay, so but in any case, I mean the most important thing here is that there is this, maybe this is a kind of a little weaker description, but what we saw before, it's really important that they are equally constitutive of a reality, right? I mean, one cannot make sense of reality without this. And this continues in then Epicurus, because there is then one passage that where there is a not by Aristotle, of course, by Aetius, a reference to Epicurus, who added, this is on the next page for us, 10, fragment 10, who then added weight, to the other elements of the atoms, that is size, shape, and then he added weight. And that was, this is also what created the problem of the atoms falling to a groundless ground, right to infinity. Okay? So, but in any case, otherwise, in Democritus, we had this kind of agitation and this ability that they had to strike one another. Then there is another, there are a few other important passages, but let me see. But more or less we saw that the most important ones, because maybe we also touched on Protagoras in a moment, but the idea is also to maybe, well, there is one about motion, this is on page 117, sorry, this is Aristotle, Metaphysics, 67a 18, right, or 19 in the current edition. For they say that there is always motion, but why it is and what motion it is, they do not state, nor do they give the cause of its being of one sort rather than another. Okay, so we saw this problem before, the problem of motion, but apparently it's not a problem if you don't have that requirement of having something, an external agent setting it into motion, right? I mean, it is a self-moving, if you will, it is, right? It's just like the individuating process, which doesn't need a starter outside of itself, right? Okay, same idea. But that's the criticism that we see in Aristotle. Again, he says the same. This is actually Alexander writing the commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics, same idea. This is fragment 24, for passage 24, in our book list. Don't you see it? This man, Leucippus and Democritus, say, right, that the atoms, this is Alexander, that the atoms move by hitting and striking against each other, but they do not specify the source of their natural motion. For the motion of striking each other is compelled and not natural, and compelled motion is posterior to natural motion. Okay, but again, we can understand this as a solved problem in a sense, right? I mean, since they constantly keep moving. Okay, so then there is a passage by Aristotle again where necessity is spoken about, but again we cannot read everything, and what I want to call attention to is also, but just by saying that there is one passage which is 37 in our edition, page 120, Diogenes Laertius 67a1, for I don't know if you did, where the word vortex is often used. Okay, in this passage, do you find it?
No.
Just I know that you do, because but this is for
There's a bunch of them that aren't here.
or maybe in the second edition they made it again. She added.
They said it's Diogenes. No?
This one, Diogenes Laertius. But anyway, the word vortex, right, repeated maybe 4 or 5 times, and it is precisely this, even if this might be simply like, it's not an explanation now, but maybe just, but certainly an insight, right? It tells us that this is, this agitation and this, therefore the possibility of combination because of this agitation is precisely this vortex in which they constantly move, the atoms in the void. So it is reality itself. That's what it is, this vortex that never ends, right? And again, we can understand that in accordance with the framework of the cycle of everything going back into, right? Into, the atoms, the compound bodies go back into the original atoms, and the agitation continues in the vortex, and the combination, the recombination, therefore, right? Everything is recycled and recombined. I don't know if, but this is the same also in Lucretius, of course, right? But it is this idea of the vortex is interesting in this sense. I don't know if there are other things that maybe we should say. Certainly there could be other things. We haven't been able to get into the Hegel and Bruno, but that's okay right for now, because maybe we want to also touch on Protagoras briefly, because I don't know how much time
I'm going to make a call to the owner of Paulette to see where they're standing on their reservation. And then, I'm just going to call him.
Okay.
If he has a table, we can go there. Earlier. If not, I'm going to tell him to cancel the 9:30.
Rachel's coming.
What's that?
Rachel's coming.
She's coming. So we're going to go to quarter probably.
That's why I included Rachel in the net, because I thought we are in Brooklyn Friday night.
We can always go to my place and I don't know, whatever you feel like doing. And then going to Paulette,
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. You want me to?
In case
should I not cancel the reservation then?
some whiskey your place, right?
I have whiskey,
It's obviously the better option, Paulette.
Paulette, yeah.
But
I'm
it's
going to tell them we're going to try to come for 9 o'clock. Huh?
Yeah, 9:30 is a little late for dinner.
Yeah.
So.
You tell me what you want to do. I can go everywhere.
Personally, I'd rather,
I'm thrown into double directions.
Thrown into
I just want to
I'd
drink.
rather eat earlier.
So would quarter be okay then?
Yeah.
You want me to cancel the Paulette? Unless he has a table earlier, okay?
For you, that's okay too?
Yes.
Okay.
Fine.
Because there'll be 5 of us, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe before we move into briefly, Protagoras and Sophists and Protagoras, I want to say just in relation to what Hegel says, it's a very interesting question, section on the atomists, but then he has a longer section on, he certainly appreciates the Sophists very much. But when he speaks, kind of critically perhaps, on page 3 or 4, no? Right? Of the question of the concrete and so on. Toward the end of that page, like 10 or 12 lines from the bottom, where you see from what Aristotle tells us in the passage last quoted, then he says, Leucippus' idea of all that is concrete and actual is followed this, right? The full is nothing simple, but it is an infinitely manifold. We saw the plurality already there, right? And I particularly like this, I will say why later, but this infinitely many move in the vacuum, right? For the void, the vacuum exists. We saw that already. Their conglomeration brings about origination. That is of an existing thing, or what is for the senses, right? Disintegration and separation result in passing away. But what I wanted to, then I noted, right, that I wanted to call attention to that this concrete, interestingly, and I made a note of it, Marx in the Grundrisse, right, says, and I quote, the concrete is concrete because it is a concentration of many determinations. hence unity of the diverse. Okay, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
But and it is also, the question of the individuals coming together, different parts and the manifold,
And the width.
The width,
The width
absolutely.
from
That's
NC
what
to-
it is. Yes.
Because the width, I think what he says is that two beings can't come entirely together, right? Because this would be, then there's no possibility of the width. Right? There's
Right,
no-
right. And so therefore
The distance.
threshold,
Yeah.
which is actually the state of agitation. I mean, I don't know if this is, of course, not. Let's say it's. I don't know. Maybe very imprecise, not precise description of what that might be, but according to the theory, and even then, I believe with Lucretius, Epicurus and Lucretius, but I mean, something like this, a solid object and a compound body, right? My body too, but this one too, right? We don't see the void, we don't see the atoms, right? But evidently the atoms keep moving. And so this is why sooner or later, even if we never use the book, sooner or later will be destroyed by itself. No? The movement of what constitutes the book, which is both the atoms and the void. The same with me and my body. I mean, even if I say comments, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to change, then sooner or later, right, this process of rot and decay and then ultimately decomposition of everything, right? I mean, it's part of this constant state of unrest and this, agitation that never ends. That really doesn't end even with death. And this is, by the way, because we spoke about this in relation to individuation, right? I mean, that's the idea that we had there too. I mean, the individuating process never completes. I mean, this is certainly what Simon Don says, but what Stigler at one point he says precisely this, that even death is not the end of not this movement of individuating. And so in any case, I believe that in the context of the atomists, we see this very well, but that this is there already in, throughout the tradition of Presocratic philosophy. Here maybe it comes more to maybe a state of fruition, precisely because of this idea of the vortex, precisely because this time we are told in maybe Aristotle said in a systematic way, right? We are told precisely that reality is constituted by what is and what is not.
There was a table earlier.
So we have that as a clear, not an explanation, a clear theory. So, but I think I like that. I don't know what you think of it, but
Okay.
can I say another thing?
Okay.
No, I mean, when I was teaching, actually Lucretius last semester in class, I was speaking about these things, because when you speak about these things, like in class, people then have the question of, the reincarnation and, the transmigration and so on comes up, right? But the idea then is precisely, and I was explaining, and some said, she was taken aback and she said, I like it, but the idea that it is not the case, like in the typical doctrine of the transmigration of souls, that an individual soul, that would be the liberal understanding of transmigration, that the individual soul then becomes another animal, another form of life, and so on and so forth. But that everything is going to decompose, this soul decompose, whatever we call body, and the material aspect, what Lucretius also says, right? I mean, the spirit, the soul, I mean, the mind, they are material as well, right? And then into the constituent atoms, right? In the vortex, and the agitation continues, and so then the atoms recombine in a completely different way. I mean, of course, there is an infinite number of atoms, but in this sense, one might say that things are recombined and come back, but not in the sense that the individual soul comes back in a reincarnated form, right? But this is a very materialist
Yes, of course.
understanding of which should be maybe spoken about more.
Yeah, I mean, you have elements of this in the dialectical biologist, and I was thinking also about, do you remember the Catholic philosopher D'Alexis Thompson, the French, he spoke about a lot of the things you're speaking about tonight, on growth and decay, generation, corruption, the Aristotelian sense, but very much out of this kind of tradition that you're citing. You know, I mean, he was a Catholic philosopher. I wasn't a Marxist, but
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because the question is that, of course, in those traditions, I mean, with the Christian and so on, there is really precisely this problem, let's say, over the individual soul, right? The individual, or the essence, which is not the case, of course, in the materialist approach. Right. I mean, so it is. Where precisely then, especially in the liberal tradition, that the individual is a fiction altogether, but precisely because of not this situation, ultimately this constitution of the real, ontological moment constitution of the real, which is always this constant state of unrest, agitation, and so on, right? So, but I wanted to move, again, we spoke, I don't know how well, but we did, the Malthus, Leucippus, ontology of agitation, combination ontology, at the end of this long, interesting journey, Presocratic, I hope we do it again, but then outside of the tradition of the Sophists, outside of the Presocratic tradition, first of all, because they come at the same time, of course, as Socrates, but it's not just that, it's that the question, the most important thing is that the question no longer applies. Basically the question of the truth, because that's the question of what is the essence, the truth, right, is erased and completely abandoned by the Sophists, right? They say, the relative truth, if anything, many truths with a small t, not with a big capital T, and you make them up, right? That's basically, in a simplified and simplistic way, what they say, you make them up through language, for example, the use of rhetoric, we know, they were teachers of the art of persuasion, and the idea fundamentally that there are at least two arguments that you can make for every issue. However, the take that of course we are going to focus on Protagoras' wonderful fragment, which is the human being is the measure of all things.
By the way, which is a great dialogue of Plato to read alongside Gorgias, which are the two main dialogues on sophistry.
Right.
And then the Meno kind of closing it, which was in search of a definition of the truth, as you know.
Right.
The Meno kind of fulfills that full circle of the Protagoras, the Gorgias, and then the Meno. And then, of course, as you know, the Phaedrus is kind of an attempt to look at this. So the Platonic dialogues play a very active role.
The Meno is also about the theory of recollection.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So that's right. But again, the fragment is.
No, I understand the fragment. I was just saying that. I was just referring to the dialogical. The dialogical really plays this out in a very good way.
Right.
They're worth reading. I know most people don't read all the Platonic dialogues, so. But at least the dialogues reconstruct this in a very interesting way.
Protagoras, Gorgias, there are dialogues, and of course, both Socrates and Plato had to be, very interested in this because precisely also they came up into a there is a kind of a contrast between right.
Well, it's the birth of dialectics in terms of the original, the new dialectics, right, which was to confront sophistry.
Right, exactly. they combat this kind of. So although then Socrates is maybe one of the best in the art of right persuasion and dialectical questioning the method. But what I want to say is that, again, I wanted to read again the wonderful, and then I will maybe speak a little about that. Again, the human being is the measure of all things, of those that are, that they are, and of those that aren't, that they aren't. What is not? Once again, at the end, just outside of the Presocratic tradition, and really at the threshold between the Presocratic tradition and then Socrates and Plato, right? Because they will react, Socrates and Plato, when we had this situation whereby the truth, what is the truth? You know what? There is no truth, right? Simple as that. Or in any case, the question is not important because it's not a question that maybe we can answer. So again, in a simplified, simplistic way, you make it up. However, it's not because, and Hegel is right in this. He says this in closing the section on Anaxagoras. He says, right? Let me go there one moment. He says precisely before introducing the Sophists, right? He says, this is page 298. Remember, we saw this last time as well. I think it was two. What is the order of the Anaxagoras section? Yeah, I mean, when he says, sorry, page...
what time is it? You have a table now, okay. Okay, we'll be down in about 10, 15 minutes, yeah. Is that okay? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye. I got us a table at all left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, can we finish and then...
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I had to give them notice that we were going to take the day.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Yeah, okay. All right.
Agitation.
Okay, I mean, you did me a favor.
Yeah. So, in any case...
I'm not trying to displace your thing here. I mean, I think you're doing... Listen, I think this is wonderful the way you turn this on Protagoras towards the Platonic dialogue and this whole distinction that goes on between the truth or the dialectics as a search for the truth of the matter, versus that of the sophist, which is really about strategies of formal argumentation, and that there ultimately is no truth, only the stronger argument, with the multiple argument, which politically, as you know, has a tremendous,
true, yes, but and I agree with you, but I also want to add something. It's not only a question of making the formal argumentation, and so that too, and we see this in particularly occupations, such as the law. Lawyers, that's what they do, right?
Of course.
Again, guilty, true, whatever, right? The defense, the prosecution, they have the same facts, the same evidence, they argue, and so on. Politicians, same idea, right? So, that is true, the use, maybe abuse of language. However, as Hegel says, let me first say that Hegel at the end of the Anaxagoras section says, we see this development of the universal in which real existence goes right over to the side of consciousness with, he repeats this again at the beginning of the Sophist tradition, in the so much decried worldly wisdom of the Sophists. And he's very much, to the point. So, then he says that what the Sophists do is not simply a question of using language, but they actually get to in a completely different way from Socrates and Plato, who always, of course, search for the truth. And this is actually on page 148 of the Kerr edition in This Soil of Gulli, examples of argumentation. Line 3 from the top of 148. Therefore, it is not their name that that differs but the fact of the manner. Okay, we don't have much time. What I mean to say is that here we have certainly a very important split between what the reality of things is, the facts and the language, right? I mean, and this is very important, we know. I mean, it's not only in the language of the law itself is only language, right? I mean, powerful language, history, right? And historiography and so on and so forth, right? But the question is, let me go back to the fragment by Protagoras. I mean, measure. The human man is the anthropos, metron. Measure, the word for measure is metron, over everything. Yeah. So now this metron, if you think of it, I mean...
Think of the meon and add the T. The ta and the ro. In the word you have meon there, and
Which
you
one?
give the metron.
Yeah, but that's...
But the etymologically is going on there. See the meton, and you have the TR in the middle.
But I don't know if there is a relation.
Yeah, of course there's a relation.
Are you sure?
Right, yeah. Well, the one is not.
I don't know.
Right?
Yeah. No,
The one is not, and then what can be measured? Why would they have that in?
Well, no, I don't know. It might simply be a coincidence.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know what I want to say.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't know. What I wanted to say rather is that, this metron,
Right.
I mean, it's not simply a matter of, I mean, it's not that the human being is the measure, meaning that we constitute things by speaking about them, by language, but it is really a matter of building the wall, right? Making,
It's not statistical.
yeah, that's the poetic, right?
You're not looking at statistical measurement.
Right.
Or measurement as such.
Measurement
You think of it in the
you
post-Cartesian universe.
Right, you take measurements when you build houses,
Right,
bridges, and so on, when you make the wall. So that's the idea, or any other thing.
Okay.
The human-made wall. That's what they focus on. They say, look, forget about the truth of the cosmic, a question, a metaphysical question, precisely the worldly wisdom, as Hegel says, and then it becomes a matter of poetic in the sense of making the world, and therefore knowing what you make. So I wanted to close maybe with a connection between the Sophists and Vico, Giambattista Vico. But before doing that, I want to remark on the things that are that they are, or those that aren't that they aren't. I mean, typically with language we can do that. I mean, even in the situation, say, a trial, right? I mean, someone makes an objection, it is overruled. Or we say that's beyond the point. That counts as nothing. That comes to nothing, right? So all the search that we saw in Presocratic philosophy about the question of what is and what is not, they say we decide what is and what is not, and we build. We are the metron. Although today we can say that who knows, maybe the virus is more of a metron than the human being, right? I mean, because it is really the situation regulating, life in a very strong. But I want to. Because we are going, soon. I want to finish.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I mean, this is the best time, I can call him back.
But can I read this passage
Yeah.
from the New Science too? Because but they are the same page. Man in his ignorance makes himself the rule of the universe. Rule, metron, is the same, okay? And then he says, so that as rational metaphysics, he's thinking here about like Descartes and so on, right? Teaches that man becomes all things by understanding them. And the Latin is homo intelligendo fit omnia. This imaginative metaphysics, which is Vico's metaphysics, right, of the body ultimately, right, shows that man becomes all things by not understanding them. And so we have the same situation in the Sophists. It is precisely because we don't understand. Instead of keeping us in the question, the Presocratics do. Socrates and Plato will do the same, right? Just make it up. So, I don't mean that in a bad way, because and perhaps the latter proposition is truer than the former. For, and this is important, when man understands, this is wonderful, he extends his mind and takes in the things. But when he does not understand, he makes the things out of himself. project and becomes them by transforming himself into them. So this is really what we are, and what I want to
That's
say.
only reification.
Yeah, absolutely, and also the embodying of the embodiment of. Well, the last thing that I want to say about it, so much deprived, as Hegel says, Sophists, because of the sophistry is a bad word, of course, right, and so on and so forth. But I want to make another notation. You know, what they do is not teaching people how to dominate and abuse others and so on and so forth. They simply are teaching the art of persuasion in the same way, if you will, that Machiavelli is not simply teaching the prince how to dominate, but giving the people, like we had a conservative or a radical, progressive understanding of Machiavelli. In the same way, that's what Machiavelli does too. He also gives precisely revolutionary, he gives revolutionaries revolutionary weapons. For constructing something different. So the same with the Sophists, right? So it's not that they are immoral. Very often people say, the Sophists, and Hegel is right in this. They're not immoral. I mean, they are simply saying, look, this is the way it is. This is the way it goes. You have to be able to make a stronger argument if you want to have.
Well, they're much more postmodern in the sense that they don't really believe in universals ultimately.
Right.
That you're going to get to the one definition or to the universal, in a sense. They're much more involved in the particularities and the singularities, which is part of the postmodern attack on totality and totalization.
Of course, as you say.
Which is interesting.
What Hegel says about the Sophists is, I think, 357, where he says, from the reflection which here breaks in, it no longer satisfies man to obey law as an authority and external necessity, for he desires to satisfy himself in himself, to convince himself through his reflection of what is binding upon him, what is his end, and what he has to do for this end.
Well, what is the page?
This is 357.
357.
Yeah, this is a beautiful section, I think, because it's also contextualizing the movement of the Sophists within the sort of composition of the state.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay, so maybe we finish and here. I mean,
that's fine. I can go myself and you can continue. It's not a problem.
The universals, of course, that will be the reaction,
Sure.
Plato's reaction against the Sophists, precisely because then they are still looking for, searching for the universal against what the Sophists did, just to, dismiss it. Which is interesting.
I mean, the Sophists today would argue more for class and class relations than would the, quote unquote, seekers of the truth in a certain way. It's kind of interesting if you kind of frame it this way, because for them, it would not be quoted one universal definition of justice or one more universal definition of beauty, in a sense. These abstracted forms in some ways is very different.
Absolutely, we don't have the time, and I don't think that we had to make a choice between what seems to be the relativism or the Sophists, or the stress on universality and the universal in Socrates and Plato and so on. They are maybe ultimately convergence, which is important. I mean, in the sense that, of course, maybe, especially speaking about justice, there may be elements of universality that remain important.
Well, I see a new force developing here, the Sophist. On sophistry, because it's absolutely crucial to our core, in a way. We can talk about this more. But sophistry, and to really think through this, because Socrates does not escape sophistry, as we know. Dialectics does not escape. In many ways. So this is interesting.
Okay, so then...
Okay, I'm sorry about this, but he called me to do us a favor, so to speak. And it's a good run. You did, Tony.
There is no